We're going to turn over to the next panel now, Assets and Children. Signa Mary McKernan is going to be leading us here with a terrific team. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay.
And your PowerPoint is ready to go. There you are. I'm going to grab my coffee. Yes.
All right. Hi, I'm Signa Mary McKernan from the Urban Institute, moderator for today's Assets and Children session. Thank you, Reed and New America Foundation, for bringing us together, and Michael Sheridan for bringing us together as an entire field. So introducing assets into a household can help families cope with hardship and potentially trigger long-term effects. Research has shown that half of children born poor will remain persistently poor, that is, poor at least half of their childhoods. Children poor at birth are more likely to be poor as adults, are more likely to drop out of high school, have a teen non-marital birth, and have patchy employment records than children who are not born poor. Child poverty costs the federal government $500 billion per year, or the equivalent of nearly 4% of GDP. So what can we do about this? Well, assets can help. Assets can help poor families weather emergencies, such as a sudden job loss or a health crisis, and they can also help families realize long-term goals, such as owning a home or financing retirement. And evidence shows that assets help families improve their lives in important ways. Research finds that homeownership is associated with better results for children of homeowners, such as higher educational attainment and lower teen pregnancy rates, and that's even after controlling for income and other factors. And it's likely because of homeownership's role in increased residential stability. But perhaps the best case for holding assets can be made with what happens when you don't hold assets. And research shows that families experience greater material hardship. Assets are at least as powerful as income in reducing hardship, and by hardship I mean ability to pay bills, food on the table. And assets also help families expand opportunity through debt, more favorably known as credit. The ability to borrow $500 in an emergency does as much to reduce hardship as tripling family income, and having assets determines whether, how much, and where you can borrow. So the general hypothesis that even small amounts of assets can change behavior and that there are asset effects was a central piece of Michael Sheridan's argument. And many of these effects were thought to happen over the life course of children. So this session will help us look back and forward on what we've learned about assets and children. So we'll hear 10 minutes from each of our three experts here, and then we're going to save time for our very expert audience to discuss what we've learned about the connection between assets and children, where we would like to learn more, and what opportunities there are in this area for policy and practice. So our first presenter is Terry Friedlein. Terry received her PhD from the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work and will be joining the University of Kansas as an assistant professor this summer. She conducts research on young people's savings as a strategy for improving well-being. And Terry's going to present today on extending financial inclusion to children and youth.
Well, good morning, and I'm going to talk about extending savings accounts to young people rather quickly, so this is fair warning for you that if you're taking notes, you can have your pens in hand. So I'm going to begin with an introduction on young people's savings, pretty basically, talk about the theory and the research on young people's savings, what we know to date, talk about some of the implications for policy, and some of the remaining questions that we have to answer, and then conclude with a few comments. So Signa Mary has already given us a nice introduction to asset building and why young people may benefit from extending savings accounts early in life and from saving at a very young age. So one of the policy proposals that has developed out of asset building are child development accounts, and these are accounts in which young people would be able to save across the life course for things like education or homeownership or 401ks. And while all young people are really intended to benefit from CDA programs and policies, those from lower income backgrounds are really the intended beneficiaries because this would give them a seat at the table to have financial inclusion and to benefit from access to savings. So these are just a list of some of the notable programs and policies that have been proposed or implemented in the last few years. I'll just highlight the Aspire Act, which was proposed in 2004 but has not yet passed into public law. But this is the policy proposal, if you're not yet familiar, that would establish a national savings program for young people. So, on to theory of saving behaviors. It's important for us to talk about theory of young people's saving behaviors, first because asset building for adults was really grounded in theory, so it's important for us to do the same for young people. And there are some different theories that are applicable here. So theory really tells us four things. First, about the role of development, the role of the family, the role of institutions, and the role of identity. So starting with the role of development. Young people are really able to begin saving at a pretty early age. They think by ages 5 and 6 that saving is a socially desirable behavior, and they take steps to do so. By about the age of 12, they can use a savings account consistently. But they don't always have the opportunity to save. So families, as Gail mentioned toward the end of her talk, families play a pretty primary role in extending accounts to young people. And some young people are advantaged to come from households that have savings on the radar and have the financial resources to extend accounts to them, and others don't. And those who are not tend to be at a disadvantage in terms of gaining early access to accounts. So that's the role of the family. Next, we have the role of institutions. So as we know from research on asset building, institutions can play a role in shaping adults' saving behaviors, but they can as well for young people. So institutions like restricted access or automatic enrollment can also shape saving behavior for young people and make that behavior automatic. When young people have accounts early in life, they begin to think about and to plan for their futures, and this is where the role of identity comes in. And I'm not going to talk about that too much because I know that that is something that Willie will be sharing a little bit about next in his talk. But when young people have accounts, they may be able to have that forward thinking, to think about what is possible for their futures. And so theories of saving behaviors have informed our research on young people's savings. So knowing how and why young people may benefit from savings programs informs how that access can lead to improved well-being. And so there are a number of research studies on improved well-being. This means that when young people have savings measured at baseline, they can have improved financial or educational well-being later in life. And so I want to note a few things about the research on young people's savings. First, that studies are implemented in a variety of ways. So some of these studies are cross-sectional, others are longitudinal, some are surveys in single high schools, others data comes from nationally representative longitudinal data sets. Margaret will share a little bit about a randomized controlled trial of savings accounts for young people in Oklahoma. So there are a variety of studies, but the point when we talk about the research on young people's savings is to point to the body of work. So there are a number of studies that consistently show that savings at baseline leads to improved well-being. And so I'm going to talk first about financial well-being. And so financial well-being here is really defined by savings. So most of the studies that look at savings at baseline, which is savings at one point in time, look at savings at a second point in time, such as if a young person has an account, do they continue to save and do they have more money saved? And so there are about 19 studies that ask this question. And the research tells us that indeed young people have better savings outcomes when they have an early account or early savings or savings measured at one point in time. However, household financial resources are still related to their later savings outcomes. So a household that has higher incomes helps young people to be able to save more money. Young people are able to interact with that account a little better when households have these higher financial resources. Educational well-being refers to academic achievement as well as college attendance and graduation. There are about 14 studies that look at savings at one point in time for improving educational well-being. And these studies find that, again, savings measured at one point in time leads to better educational outcomes at a later point in time, both in terms of, for example, higher math scores or more likely to attend or graduate from college. Again, household financial resources are still related to their educational well-being. However, the relationship is stronger between young people's savings and their educational outcomes. And this suggests to us that it's appropriate to intervene at the level of young people as opposed to only intervening at the household level, so young people can benefit from having these savings interventions early in life. So, a few policy implications that are probably familiar to us. First, to extend accounts as early as birth or at a young age, because young people are developmentally ready to begin saving and can make steps to do so. Secondly, to enroll young people into savings accounts using an automatic and opt-out design. As we mentioned, savings, household financial resources are related to young people's savings. So those from higher income backgrounds are more likely to opt into savings accounts. So in order to have inclusion, especially for those from lower income households, automatic enrollment and an opt-out design can facilitate this. Lastly, to embed progressive institutional mechanisms into account design. So again, young people from higher income households save more money because their families have more financial resources to contribute to their savings. If there are progressive institutions to help young people save, they can accumulate more money over time and benefit from the small dollars in those accounts. So there are a few remaining questions, actually quite a number of remaining questions that we have to answer in terms of research. A number of you have already highlighted some of them for us, but I'm going to point to the last two bullet points on this slide, which are with regard to the institutional mechanisms in savings account design. So our really long-term goal has been to pass something like the Aspire Act to create a universal national CDA policy here in the US, but we know not so much about exactly what those accounts will look like. They're often proposed to have a number of institutional mechanisms, and so we don't yet know which institutional mechanisms are important for young people. We can know a little more about that, and which ones most effectively shape young people's saving behaviors. There may be institutional mechanisms that we've used for adults, like incentives, like restricted access, that are appropriate for the adult population, but are not necessarily immediately transferable to young people's circumstances. So we need to figure out what those institutional mechanisms are, and once we do that, what value does each individual mechanism add to the overall account design? Answering this question can help us streamline account design, create a more effective policy, hopefully one that's a little more cost-effective as well. And so a few concluding remarks include, first, that young people are able to participate in saving at a rather early age, so we can consider extending savings accounts to young people as an appropriate point of intervention, and theory and research on young people's savings can inform account design, particularly with regard to CDAs or child development accounts. There are quite a number of remaining questions that we have to answer, especially if we want to move from young people's savings as a policy concept to one that's public law. So if we can be a little more detailed in our research about what this account design will look like, exactly how young people will make their deposits, how they will engage with financial institutions, what institutional mechanisms are important for this account design, we can provide policy makers with the information that they may need to make informed decisions about a broad policy proposal. And so when we answer these questions well and thoroughly, we can move a policy like the Aspire Act from a policy concept, one that's been proposed, into one that hopefully passes into public law. So with that, I will turn it over to Signa Mary.
Thank you, Terry. That was a nice summary of what we know and gaps that are remaining. So our second presenter is Willie Elliot. Willie is an assistant professor at the University of Kansas, a senior fellow at the New America Foundation, and a faculty associate at the Center for Social Development. Willie will present on how assets are connected to education and give us a little bit more of the theory behind this.
I don't have any catchy PowerPoints, but I do want to say thank you to Reed for inviting me to New America Foundation and for all your support with my work over the last few years, so thank you. So today I'm going to talk about thinking about how children assets may affect their educational outcomes. One of the most compelling aspects of children's savings programs is the potential for changing how children think in regards to school. However, theory and research on the psychological effects of assets are in their early stages of development. Identity-based motivation theory, or IBM, is one of the most promising areas of inquiry, in my opinion. IBM focuses on visions children have of themselves in a future state, for example, like possible selves. In this case, we're going to speak about their college-bound identity. Although the term identity can be invoked to refer to a diverse array of concepts, IBM focuses on the aspects of identity that directly influence behavioral choices. According to IBM theorists, abstract conceptions of the self are most likely to guide everyday behaviors when they are, what I like about these are simple concepts, salient, congruent with group identity, and also equipped to help children overcome difficulties. These principles have been shown to be important predictors of children's school behaviors. So I'm going to try to build on this framework in 4 different ways. One, provide important, so this talk will build on the IBM framework by suggesting that, in particular, formal institutions can, 1, provide important contextual cues that bring the college-bound identity to the forefront of the mind, 2, tie the college-bound identity to the national identity, 3, provide embedded thought processes or strategies for overcoming and interpreting difficulty as normal, and 4, provide power over resources. According to Sheridan and Barr, a formal institution within the applied social science context can be thought of as a type of intervention. This is key to what I'm about to say. Designed to alter behaviors and outcomes of individuals. As such, a national children's savings program might be thought of as a type of institution. And I will proceed with that kind of thought in mind. So salience, according to IBM theory, identities are salient when they are on the mind. So when you're thinking about them, have them at the forefront of your mind, they're salient. In order for something to be on the mind, it does not have to be consciously cued or activated by children themselves. In fact, because people are unable to actively process all cognitive stimuli and have a limited capacity for making conscious decisions, right? It would be foolish to assume that children spend much of their time consciously activating identities. Instead, they get cues from their environment, which trigger these identities. These cues initiate the college-bound identity and the set of strategies associated with it without the child having to do it himself or herself. So it's not an active process. We have a limited capacity as human beings to think about these identities, to initiate them. So there's cues in the world that automatically trigger them and make them happen. Of institutions, Amartya Sen says, individuals live and operate in a world of institutions. Our opportunities and prospects depend crucially on what institutions exist and how they function, end quote. As a type of institution, CSAs can play a pivotal role in cueing college-bound identity among children. I think we need to be thoughtful of that and purposeful in thinking about how these institutions are designed so they actually do these types of things. In regards to congruence, according to IBM, when an image of the self feels tied to ideas about relevant social groups like friends, family, even citizen, the congruent personal identity becomes reinforced. For children, assets are almost always connected to a larger social unit or the family. Even when opening their own accounts, children are often supported by parents or other family members. I'd like to say a lot more on that, but time won't let me. When elements of a family's environments contain cues about assets, like when a parent has school savings for his or her child, The presence of such resources can bolster parents' expectations, and we've seen this in the evidence, for the child, influencing his or her own interactions with the child and the child's own college expectations and school-related behaviors. A lack of assets, on the other hand, makes economic struggles salient, which can be incongruent with a focus on future goals like college. As the college bound identity loses salience, school behaviors decline. Very basic concept. When children and their families save money for college, the meta message asserts, which I wish the asset rule would grab a hold of, we save, we go to college. That's the meta message that's being portrayed outwards, reinforcing the college bound identity through its congruence with the actions and goals of the larger group. A national CSA program has the potential to link children's personal savings to the social group Americans, right? We as Americans, we save, we go to college. Not only as a family, but we as Americans do that. And I think a national program could have that possibility of creating those kind of congruent ideas. In addition to being salient and congruent, to be actionable, college-bound identity must also be linked to detailed strategies for overcoming and interpreting difficulties as normal. IBM research suggests children who have identities linked to detailed strategies are more likely to sustain ongoing self-regulatory behavior, engagement in school. However, too often, low and modest income children's college-bound identities are not linked to detailed strategies. Here again, this is, in the educational literature, this is well established. I suggest this is because children develop strategies for achieving goals at the same level of need they live at. For example, Noring finds that low-income consumers are more likely to report saving for daily expenses, what they call survival needs. Middle-income consumers are more likely to report saving for emergencies, what they call security needs. And high-income consumers are more likely to report saving for future opportunities, growth needs. If children's level of need is food, shelter, and income, food, shelter, and clothing, they likely have little time for developing strategies related to college, even though they want to go to college and know that it is very important for their future, and this is rational, right? This is a rational way of thinking. Formal institutions can provide children with schemas, rules, norms, and routines, strategies, that become embedded thought processes for overcoming difficulties related to college or for interpreting difficulty as normal. For example, Elliot, Shradden, Johnson, and Guo find that the portion of comparison group children, 20%, who mentioned savings as important was approximately the same as among the treatment group, 23%, in a small children's savings program called I Can Save during second grade. However, by fourth grade, I Can Save children were far more likely to mention savings as being important to their ability to finance college, 74%, than comparison group children, 25%. The embedded thought process or strategy is that, in this case, is most simply stated by Sydney, a lower income student. She said, well, I'm going to pay for college because I have my bank account, right? And having these types of programs can create this kind of thought process. This proposition that institutions can provide an embedded thought process is based on institutional theory. For example, analysis of institutions and rational choice, Nobel Prize winner Douglas North states, much of what passes for rational choice is not so much individual cognition as the embeddedness of the thought process in the larger social and institutional context. So we need to provide low-income individuals, children, with these types of institutions that will give them these kinds of embedded thought processes. So similarly, in a reference to asset accumulation, Michael Shradden observes, the middle class participates in retirement pension systems not as a matter of making superior choices. Instead, a priori, choices are made by social policy, and individuals walk into the pattern that has been established. We need to create these kinds of patterns for low-income children, and I think children's savings is one way to do that. So now power over resources. We all can imagine a scenario where the college-bound identity is on the mind of a child. The child expects to go to college, for example. Both the parent and the child have the goal of the child attending college. The parent expects the child to go to college, for example, and the child has developed strategies for attending college, demonstrated by good grades. but the child lacks the power over resources to attend college. Sandy, Beverly, and I call this WILT. The Advisory Committee on Student Financial Assistance calls this MELT. MELT or WILT is when a child expects to attend college while in high school and has the grades to attend college, but fails to do so shortly after high school. Whether you call WILT or MELT, it suggests that giving children power over resources is a necessary and important part of making the college by identity actionable. Right? Institutions give individuals power over resources. As such, they help provide people with the opportunities to act. In a highly specialized, highly technical society like we live in today, success is not what we can do on our own. It is not as simple as giving someone a plot of land and saying, farm this, but success is now determined more than ever by what we can do when we are given access to societal resources. This is, to me, a fundamental part of my thinking about the world and life. Our world has changed. Our environment has changed. It is no longer enough simply to have effort and ability. You have to have effort and ability combined with societal resources. And that allows us to do much more than we could do on our own. For example, if you come into my classroom and turn in a paper that was not written using a word processor and research using the internet, your chance of receiving an A is greatly reduced. Computers and the internet have almost become basic survival needs for a student in the 21st century, nearly as important to their success as food, shelter, and clothing. Finland has made fast internet access a legal right, an extreme example that may become more common as technology reshapes what we define as basic necessity. Our world has changed dramatically. In order for an identity to be actionable, it must be linked to society's resources. A basic function of institutions is to distribute resources. Therefore, I suggest that CSAs provide a way to link the college-bound identity to society's resources. Right? I was going to go in my conclusion and talk about some practical ways that CSAs could be designed to do that. I think we can get to that in question and answer. To allow myself a little bit of freedom to say something else, I want to talk about this. I grew up as a poor individual and extensive homelessness. And what I want to say about that is when you're poor, to be successful, you have to hope against hope, right? You can't just do what's rational all the time, because people are going to tell you in your environment, the cues that you get on a day-to-day basis are going to tell you that you can't be a professor. You can't be whatever, right? Whatever these things are. And so you have to be the kind of person, and this is where these things like self-efficacy come into play. And they talk about self-efficacy theory. This theory here talks about what a poor person could do given institutional structures. Self-efficacy talks about what the exceptional poor person can do kind of on their own, right? So what I'm saying is you have to be that kind of person if you're not given access to institutions. You have to hope and hope and hope when there's no rational reason to do so. And this is my kind of plea to you, and I have no right to say this, but I'll go ahead anyhow. And that is, I hear this message continuously, and I agree, and I am a rational person. I do understand these things, but a certain amount of poorness stays in me, and I hope against hope. And so what I'm saying to the field is while we might want to accept some small package of what we think might work for children to be successful, just give them accounts or just do this. And I think all that's great, right? I know you have to start somewhere. But understand this, the moment that policy is passed and they're given those accounts, we will be judged by those who are against us. And if that's not enough to be successful, right, to make real dramatic changes in these children's lives, it will ultimately be cast down when the next administration comes along and when everything else happens. So I think we have to be very mindful and very thoughtful of what will work, not just what we can get past. If what we can get past we don't think will work, we should wait and fight harder and longer. So that's my kind of message to everyone. And I'll close it off there. I do have some ideas about this we can talk about later.
Thank you, Willie. That was terrific, already getting us thinking. Our final presenter is Margaret Clancy. So Willie's meta message was, "We save, we go to college." Margaret will talk to us about the College Savings Initiative. And Margaret has an extensive background in 401k plans administration and in child development account program management and research. At the Center for Social Development, she's been using her expertise in financial services and knowledge of 529 plans to do research and to lead large-scale policy demonstrations, including SEED. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Signe Mary. The Center for Social Development has focused on education, assets for education for the past decade. We are pleased to do this research and appreciate the funders and our colleagues who make it possible. I'm especially pleased to participate in this working celebration of the asset field and Michael's work. So this assets in education work has resulted in a growing body of research that finds a positive association of savings with college success over time and yields important results for insights for policy. In 2009, CSD collaborated with the New America Foundation in the College Savings Initiative. The goal is to increase post-secondary education access and completion rates, particularly among low and moderate income individuals throughout the nation. The CSD team initiated a program of research using longitudinal data sets to ask whether household savings is associated with later college success. Previously, there had been almost no evidence on the role of savings in college completion. These studies, which were either undertaken or commissioned by CSD, have compelling findings. As one example, the WILT research that Willie mentioned was led by Willie Elliot and Sandy Beverly, finds that savings in a child's name is strongly associated with attending post-secondary education. Controlling for other factors, including household income and children's academic achievement, children with a savings account are 6 times more likely to attend college. This particular study gained traction nationwide and has been highlighted in speeches by Education Secretary Arne Duncan and San Francisco Mayor Newsom and Treasurer Cisneros for the Kids to College Savings Program. Throughout the U.S., state treasurers have posted these results on their 529 College Savings Plan websites to encourage post-secondary education savings. Setting aside the finding that the poor can save, this study seems to be the most frequent quoted of studies, I think because it had that easy 6 times more likely to attend college. In another CSD study, Zahn and Sherrod examined the extent to which household assets and liabilities are related to disparities in children's college attendance and college graduation among white, black, and Hispanic families. Results indicate that after household assets are considered, a substantial portion of the black-white gap in college attendance and college graduation disappears, and a small portion of the Hispanic-white gap in college graduation also disappears. Since 2001, CSD has conducted research on college savings plans and recommended policy reforms. 529 College Savings Plan deposits grow tax-free if used for future higher education expenses. Despite the rapid growth of 529s, low and moderate income families are much less likely to participate to own accounts than wealthier families. We seek to inform a more inclusive platform for education savings. Although created specifically for college savings, aspects of the 529 account design, including centralized accounting, low deposit minimums, and savings matches, which are currently offered in about 10 states, make 529s a possible structure for child development accounts in the U.S. However, A primary lesson of the Harold Alphon College Challenge in Maine is that a statewide child development account offering does not ensure universal participation. The Alphon College Challenge offers $500 to every newborn in the state, but it was designed so that a 529 account must be opened as a prerequisite to receiving the funds. When a one-year enrollment deadline passes, there is no opportunity to claim funds at a later date. Our research shows that of the Alphon Challenge eligible babies born in January 2009, approximately 60% had not been enrolled by the end of January 2010 and are precluded from participating in the program. In contrast, when the Child Trust Fund was in place, each child in the UK received a voucher to start a savings account, and the government assigned unredeemed vouchers to financial institutions so that every newborn had an account. Other state 529 plans have created incentive programs for newborn children. North Dakota, for example, started the Children First program in 2011. Rhode Island also offers an initial deposit incentive to encourage families to open 529 accounts for their newborns. These programs place no limits on household income. They are offered to all parents in Maine, North Dakota, and Rhode Island who enrolled their child by her first birthday in the state's 529 plan. Yet this approach raises important policy considerations. Statewide programs that do not automatically enroll all children may disproportionately benefit financially savvy families. A CSD study indicates that parents who had higher levels of education and owned stocks and bonds were more likely to enroll their child early in the Alphon Challenge program. Parents with greater financial sophistication may have a better understanding of the program benefits, rules, and the application process. If the goal of CDAs is to promote savings and investment for children and families of all backgrounds, automatic enrollment is necessary to ensure universal access. The Seed for Oklahoma Kids experiment, which models a universal CDA program, uses 529 accounts as the saving vehicle. An Oklahoma 529 plan account was automatically opened and seeded with an initial deposit of $1,000 for infants of all treatment participants. In Seed OK, we've demonstrated experimentally that nearly 100% of the treatment group children hold the automatically opened Oklahoma 529 state-owned account. One mother declined the account because her faith didn't allow her to hold investments. These participants were also offered a savings match to encourage them to open and save in their own 529. Treatment participants opened 529 accounts at significantly higher rates than the control participants. Compared to 1% of the control group, 16% of the treatment group hold an OK participant-owned 529. On average, the treatment group has saved significantly larger amounts, although a difference in savings is modest. These results are on our website in a paper that was led by Younju Nam, Youngmi Kim, Michael Shred, and I were also co-authored, and it's forthcoming in JPAM. So early findings that from Seed OK suggest that CDAs have positive impacts on savings and asset accumulation for children's future development. Further research is required to test long-term effectiveness of CDAs on child outcomes. RTI International collected the second wave of survey data for Seed OK just late last year. So the teams at both RTI International and the Center for Social Development are analyzing these data now. But we expect future researchers to follow these children through college age. I'll conclude with a couple of quotes from a forthcoming CSD research paper based on in-depth interviews with Seed OK participants. One young mother talked about her economic struggles. Income fluctuations have made it difficult for her to save for her child. Yet, when asked about the meaning of the SEED-OK state-owned account, she replied, "It gives me something to look forward to, gives me a better outlook. I think it made me think they actually cared about my child's future along with me." Similarly, a 28-year-old single mother of 4 said, "Yeah, just knowing that not only do I care about the future of my children, but that the bigger picture, there's other people that do care about what happens with our kids. They're not just my kids, they're everybody's kids." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. That was lots of interesting findings that I was learning too. That was great. So now I'd like to open up the panel to questions from the audience. Please state your name and affiliation as you ask, and if a hand doesn't go up quickly, I'll ask the first question. Okay. Maybe as the mic goes over, I'll start, and that is, Willie said that, not just any account, that we don't just want any account, we want the right account. So how should children's savings accounts be designed to meet their potential? We've heard a little bit about automatic enrollment. Matches, we know, increase participation. Non-taxability distributes the benefits to higher income, so I think that these are all considerations. But what other considerations should we be thinking about to get that right account? Whoever wants to start.
One of the things that, is this on? One of the things that we consider in our work, and I guess it began after the American Dream demonstration when the accounts were in bank accounts in communities throughout the country. There were 12 sites in the American Dream demonstration. So when we were planning the SEED initiative, Bob Friedman, Michael Sheridan, and others, we were thinking more about scale, and was there a current platform that might be available that could hold accounts that would be throughout a state, not just in a community. And we also wanted to think about how the administrative burden of these accounts could be outside of a community organization that in many cases was a social service organization not really equipped to handle financial transactions and do savings matches. And because in college savings plans across the nation there were already matches occurring, that was a platform that we see as having potential to serve greater populations, and also the financial piece could be housed in a state organization.
I'll say one other thing on that note. I think there is this good tension between what we can hope for and what is reasonable, and we have to just keep that in our minds. I will say that the body of evidence that I've seen so far in regards to education suggests that giving children access to some of this money along the way might be a very good idea. The liquid nature of assets is also very important, whether it be for emergency funds or whatever else. And so I think we have to keep that in mind and not ignore that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the long-term savings, because we need to do that, right? That needs to be there. But we need to find a way that we can also allow the children to access some of this money. Because this serves as cues every time when we're able to access this money that we're talked about in this little talk here. And so I think we need to think about that.
There was a question in the back.
Thank you. Lee Tivell with CFED. I want to thank the panel for their remarks and their work, and Willie, thank you especially for your important cautions. I really do think that this is an idea, I'm a little bit biased, but an idea whose time has come, although it's taking a while, and that we are seeing early adopters who are picking up on this idea and building momentum, even though we don't yet have the national policy that we all really are hoping for. But I will say, my phone right now is ringing off the hook with school districts, cities, states, foundations that are asking us to help them design and launch children's savings programs. And so I want to sort of follow on to what you said, Signa Mary, with less of a question and more of a plea to our friends in the research community that there are still some very practical day-to-day questions that we get asked all the time that we don't have the answers to. So things like, how much is enough? What's the magic number that helps us trigger that asset effect? And how important is it for some of that to come from incentives versus savings? And what's the right kind of breakdown there? How long do we need to provide incentives? How long does it take before sort of that savings habit develops and continues over time? And at what age? I know we all would love to see accounts at birth, but in a context where that's not always possible, what is the sort of, what is the sweet spot where we can have the largest impact in the smallest amount of time for kids and families? So just a plea to the research community as you're thinking about this and doing your continued good work, that we'd love to be kind of sharing those ongoing questions with you.
That's an indirect plea to the funders to keep funding us so we can ask these questions.
Okay, I think that's a terrific set of questions. Well, I wrote them down. We'll keep them in mind.
Ford Foundation, thank you for a fabulous panel. I have a question. You talked a lot about the relationship between child savings and college attendance and college completion. I wonder if there's anything you can add about the relationship between child savings and student debt on the back end.
I think that's a good question, and one that I don't know whether that's been thoroughly explored. So most of the research on child savings really focuses on whether they continue to save, if they save more money, if they go to college and graduate from college, but has not yet touched on that relationship with debt so much. Some of Willie's more recent work has looked at, is this on? Yeah, okay. Has looked at how students pay for college, what are the resources that they use to pay for college, and I think that that's a good start when looking at the children's savings college relationship.
I would also point you to, we had a recent conference on assets in education, and you can go to the Center for Social Development website and also the KU website. I think Reed could probably get this information out to people. But Min Zahn has done a paper on assets in education, assets in debt, so that might be a first good look at that. And I also did a paper on how students finance college. But Zahn's paper is much more to the point. So I think that'd be a good starting place. And we have several papers we're thinking about doing this summer and in the future on debt. So that's one of our key areas of interest in looking into more. But Zahn's paper would be a good first start.
That's Zahn and Sheridan, Assets and Liabilities, Educational Expectations in Children's College Degree Attainment. I believe, and Michael's here since he was one of the co-authors, I believe that the findings indicate that both financial and non-financial assets are positively related to college completion, and that unsecured debt was negatively associated with college completion. So that is a great paper to look at. Michael, do you want to add anything? There's the website, or I'm sorry, the microphone.
Min Zahn's paper that was presented at the KU conference also looks at student debt specifically. It's a complex relationship, but the finding is that large amounts of student debt are negatively related to college completion. Actually quite disturbing finding, because not only those students have large student debt, they have no college degree. Something to think about.
There's a question back here.
While the microphone's going back, that's one of the great things about children's savings is that we're loans, all you get is access to college. With children's savings, you also have these additional effects that encourage engagement, these other kind of things, these positive things, and lead towards graduation. So I think we have a real case for children's savings and redirecting some of that money from student loans towards starting a CSA program.
Hi, my name is Meredith Dotson, and I'm with a grassroots organization called Results. And I hate to say this in an academic setting, but what I love the 6 times more likely to go to college. And I present all over the country when I'm training folks in doing advocacy and why they should care about tax policy and asset building. I use that, and they love it. It's like one of their favorite statistics ever. So I have a lot of experience having folks really respond to that. And in some ways, I'd love your 3 other best simple facts on children's savings that I can dumb down and probably, not fair in an academic sense, but from an organizing sense. I would love a few more of those. If you have any right now, I'd take them. Otherwise, I'd love them later.
Burst her bubble and acknowledge that it's a confusing fact. It's not 6, it's 4 in one case and 7 times more likely in another. I mean, it raises the issue of how hard it is to actually get research findings that can then get seamlessly into the policy conversation.
I think it's the case, right? So it is difficult to have sound bites as we so desperately want. But the great thing about where we're at this point, I don't think we need sound bites anymore. In saying that, I'm saying that we have a body of evidence now that is convincing in and of itself. So while we need sound bites, I think we can be more educated about how we provide these sound bites. And I think that's part of our responsibility and I think that's something that we have planned. I know I'm working on some stuff with CSD about marketing and thinking about these things in NAF, and we'll think about ways to give you better bites of information. So I think moving forward, we'll create those. We have a growing, I shouldn't say large, but a growing body of evidence that we can work on and talk from, and we need to think about ways to do that.
This is really such an important conversation because children are such a valuable kind of pathway for thinking about, how to get to the asset experience, the asset effect, thinking about how it works within families and among children. And my day job, I think a lot about policy and how to design these long-term, interventions and policy infrastructures that might include everybody. And then I go home and I look at my 11-year-old and 14-year-old, and your comments on salience and identity and some of that work are still, I think, very relevant to this conversation, and figuring out what the links are between what we can learn about salience and identity and being able to implement it in terms of policy. So I came home planning this conference, a lot of things on my mind, and my 11-year-old had lost his device. This was the crisis of the evening. There were tears. This is how he's relating to the world right now. We kept him away from media when he was very young, but as an 11-year-old, he has latched on. And it did remind me of some of the work that's going on in the field that Tim is doing at D2D, where they're looking at apps and games and ways to engage with different kinds of children at different stages. So anyway, Tim, I wanted to see if you had anything to add to this conversation. I told him I was going to pass the mic to him. Around salience and identity and the savings process, the education process, and even maybe accounts.
Wow, thanks, Reed. That's a lot to... well, I guess a couple of points, which may not be the ones that Reed was thinking of, but when I think about the Children's Savings Account Challenge, I think it's a couple of different things, right? Probably more than I'm thinking of, but there's an infrastructure piece, there's a match piece, which is policy related, and a lot of you in this room know we've done a lot of work with the U.S. Savings Bond Program and the Retail Securities Program, and it just strikes me that on that first challenge of kind of making sure everybody has a bucket, if you will, to save in, we should not forget that those pieces of the answer to that exist in a lot of places, and sometimes they're eroding while we're not watching them. And so just be aware that the federal government is in the savings account business, in effect, and has been for 70 years with a really safe, high quality, in some cases inflation protected product, but it is eroding, and I think all of us should pay attention to that and look for ways to support the idea that government at the federal level should not only do policy, but actually provide, in a sense, the product to make good on that policy. The second thought that was running through my mind is that so often in these discussions, we have this spectrum of tools and where we can mandate participation or maybe make it opt out. That's a really attractive option, but there'll be a lot of places where that's not possible. And then the conversation, we believe, really needs to focus a lot on engagement. What was the figure? 60% in Maine did not take advantage, right? So how do you find those 60% if it's an environment where you can't kind of mandate it, right? Or you can't strong arm people in some way? And I just think there's a lot of work to be done here. Our focus has been using video games in some cases, trying to make things that are often unpalatable into something really interesting or maybe something really fun. In other cases, use of prizes as incentives instead of straight up matches, which infuse the experience of saving with an element of suspense and sort of fun and discovery and maybe aspiration and so on. So I just think that issue of engagement is really important. Reed, was that anywhere what you were thinking about? Okay, and I guess the last thing, which we can't say a lot about, but I think we have it on good authority that a federal agency will be pursuing mobile apps in the next couple of months as a way to accomplish some of the goals we're talking about here. And I just want to plant that seed, and I think when that announcement comes, all of you will have a role to play in responding to that and thinking about ideas so that Reed's 11-year-old and his device can use that device not just to play games, but to really think about financial access and products and also financial capability. So sorry not to be able to say more on that, but I think that'll be very exciting when it comes.
Okay, Willie's going to make one final comment, and then we're out of time.
Yeah, I didn't answer the will question very good. I think one of the things that we should think about in that whole scenario with papers is the sound bites can come from the descriptive analysis. And one of the great things, and in the multivariate analysis, either supports the descriptive or not, right? So whether we can really rely on and in the will paper, we see that 55% of children without savings experience will. We're only like 20% of children with savings experience will. Basic thing, right? And beyond that, just the concept of that both this ACSFA paper and this other paper identify and recognize that melt's occurring, right? To me, the idea of will, the concept of will, was as interesting as any of the findings itself, right? That this goes on, that children expect to go to college. That it's not just about effort plus ability, something else is going on for why some children aren't going to college. That was the big, to me, the moment, right? And then you look at the fact that the descriptive data were backed up by the multivariate analysis, which multivariate analysis is by its very nature somewhat confusing, right? There's not a simple message there. And I think, so that's how I would answer that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was nice to hear some theories, some findings, and then to hear questions that we should follow.